Hello and welcome again to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am, as ever, your slightly annoying but not annoying to turn it off host, Ben Wheeler. And I am here with D.G.D. Davidson and Hawkings Austin and the ever effervescent Jagi Lamplighter. Today we have a couple of different books that we're talking about. Jake and the Dynamo, written by D.G.D. Davidson. The Bone God and Pure Poison, written by Hawkings Austin. Let's start off with, because you got a nose ahead of them. D.G.D. Davidson, talk about your book for a minute.
Well, thank you. My name, you can just refer to me as the Deej if my name is a little too hard to say repeatedly. But yes, this is Jake and the Dynamo. It is my debut novel. It is somewhat of a fusion hybrid between American novels and kind of Japanese light novels. It's a magical girl story of sorts. We've got a rather luckless, hapless teenage boy named Jake Blatowski who finds himself sent back to 5th grade on account of an error on his transcript where he runs into this little girl who starts basically pestering him, and he soon finds out that she actually has magic powers and is fighting off the monsters that are constantly plaguing the city. He ends up as her reluctant sidekick and is following her around. It's a combination of slapstick comedy and fast-paced action, and it's coming out probably the 1st of next month, September 1st. So.
Now, I do have to ask, how long into the series until you pull a Genu Rabuchi and start killing characters?
Well, I won't. I've killed a character off in this first one, and I expect I'll be killing more in future ones. So people do die in the world of Jake and the Dynamo. It's there's actually a pretty high body count in the book. It's one that I was deliberately avoiding the kind of the large violence without any death or blood that's kind of sometimes happens in this type of genre. So there's actually quite a few deaths in the book. Although Jagi here has read it, she can probably attest that in spite of that, it remains funny.
Without question, the book is hilarious.
I am a big fan of morbid humor. But let's go off onto Hawkings Austin with The Bone God.
Hey, this is Hawk, and The Bone God. Wow. It's the sequel to The Broken Man. It is Irish fantasy. It is less fantastic than history, and it is fantastic in that there is sorcery, and there is set in a very real Bronze Age world.
Excuse me.
That's a noise.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That was appropriate, really, to that cover coming.
Really was.
That is. I was like, wow. The Bone God. Anyway, the fun part is, well, I've got a body count like you wouldn't believe, but but that's because sorcery and murder, and it is a
classic.
Yeah, there are, like the Broken Man, there are bad people out there who are killing people, and our heroes are going to stop them. Maybe. There's
Really?
a lot of maybe in this. Yeah.
It's definitely a series where you don't know if somebody important is going to get killed off. There's scenes where I hold my breath hoping that my characters will make it.
For this live stream, we should compare body counts.
Yeah. There's
I'm like a little tick off,
There's a couple of points here where there's a few, but I'll say that I'm in the midst of writing the sequel to the two of them, so at least some of the characters continue on, and we still have, for morbid humor, Waylaid's take on what's amusing, which usually involves something horrible happening to someone, and Piju, who's I guess the as Jagi calls him, the heart of things. He's
Yeah.
a almost normal-ish, somebody you can relate to kind of person, a young man who's trying to make his way in a very it's a confusing world in that for a normal boy of his sort, you'd live in a village of maybe 50 families total, and that's where you'd be born, and those are the people you would know, and only people being born adds people to the village, and people dying, and that's how they go, and that is normal, and you spend eternity there. I mean, that's what you'd say the normal life for everybody prior to the modern world. And he's unfortunately been forced to become a more modern person in that he's been picked up as the apprentice to a giant, and he is trekking all around Pyre, putting down ghosts. And after that, it gets complicated.
As it should.
You know, I was just thinking that both Jake and Piju are probably about the same age, and that both of them are in kind of a slightly similar position in that there's all these guys using magic and blowing things up and around them. And
and that's not their skill set
themselves, you know?
That's the same for Jake as well.
The stories are very different, and the genres are very different, but they both have that, you know, that young man that you can relate to who's kind of in the heart of things while everything goes on around him.
That reminds me of the counseling scene from the Venture Brothers, where like all the boy wonders are talking about their dads or adventurers or whatever who they were attached to, and they all have like problems and PTSD. And it's like he's walking in, it's like, all right, Piju, thanks for sharing. Today we've got a new friend. You know, Jake tells about it, and he's like, like twitching a bit, glitter, and it's like, oh, okay, well. You sit right there, and I'm sure you'll talk when you're ready.
So Hawk has a second book coming out also, and this one's quite different.
Yeah, now, Pure Poison is an urban fantasy, and it's my first attempt at urban fantasy, and it took a little bit. Long story is, there's a writer, was a writer. Manly Wade Wellman, he's passed some years ago, but I really loved his Appalachian witchcraft novels, and I call them urban fantasy, but it's more of a modern mountain man fantasy kind of books. Silver John or John the Wanderer series, and they're free on Bane. You can just go check out their website. But I wanted to continue-ish those books, but with a slightly more modern setting than the 50s, 60s of the mountains, and bring it up into 2016 and Knoxville, which is, you know, just down the hill from where those stories took place. And I've written about a dozen things, and I simplified it out and found a single story that, two stories really, I guess, because we're not going to be long till the sequel comes out. But I found a single story that could be told in a single book. And Pure is not, I guess she's closer to a magical girl than Piju is. She actually has weird properties to herself that she doesn't understand.
Named Purity, who's called Pure. So
right.
Pure Poison.
Oh, sorry. I should have started at that part
because it refers to the both the sense of pure poison and the main character. It's actually quite sweet.
Now I adore Purity, and I've been with her for several years now. And she's been in my brain, and she's a sweetheart, and she has some weird friends, and unlike,
come on, gruff talking dwarf.
Yeah, well, they're all, everyone in the book is a real person. When I wrote Pure Poison and its sequel, when it comes out, every person there is from when I lived in Knoxville. I could walk down the street and point to them, with the exception of Purity herself, who's a mix of two people who one of whom will kill me if I mention her name on the air. So she's not involved in it. But
it's okay to have it be, real people without necessarily saying who they are.
Yeah. But let's just say that as we do readings of it,
the guy who's the son of the mountain, is he a real person? I thought he was really interesting character.
Oh God, yeah. Okay, so now this is partially from hanging out in Vanderbilt. He's actually not from Knoxville. He's from Vanderbilt. And
but he exists.
Yeah.
He's a guy. Wow.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I assume this is the fantasy version of him, but still.
Right. But no, if you go down to Printers Row in Vanderbilt, back in the back, there's a jazz club, and he sits in the back, or he used to. It's been a few years since I've been down there, but yeah, I have talked to him. I know him. Yes, he's a person.
That's really cool.
Of course, he has.
Character says he's the son of the. One of the things I love in this book, and I guess we can start here and then move out towards the other books. But one of the things I love in this book is it's got a kind of the main character, being from the 50s, has got kind of a pro-Christian attitude, which is not that usual in fantasy. But there's also things like this guy who says his grandfather, I think it is a mountain. And there's various spirits of the mountain that show up who are kind of friendly. And I actually really like the kind of, I don't know, there was a sense, there was dark things, but there was a sense of kind of white magic, as if not all the supernatural world was necessarily evil, even if it was tricky or not necessarily, right for humans or something. And I really liked that mood, that it just seemed a kind of an appealing place where there was good as well as bad. And
you Catholics are better at this than the Baptists. And I grew up Southern Baptist. We have a real big trouble with any kind of magical animals or magic showing up. Man, that's got to be evil. Whereas there's teachings that say this stuff is unsafe, really, really unsafe, but it isn't inherently evil. And you have to look at it in terms of authorities and power over people is not safe. It's not safe to be somebody's boss. I mean, that's clear enough, but the actual power to adjust somebody, that's not safe. But it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you have powers. And any more than
certain powers can be more evil than others.
Right, sure. The power to drop somebody in their tracks is scary, but just the power to influence.
Pure Poison background has definite pure evil things.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it also has supernatural things that are not pure evil. They're more like, I'm going to put a link in the chat. I don't know, Ben, if you have the ability, like Jason often does, to put it with the on the website.
No problem.
But this is a article that a fellow writer wrote for our Superversive Inkling website that reminds me of the Pure Poison world, and that I think you guys might enjoy. And it's an article by a American Indian retired cop about the things he ran into as a cop and why he loved Bigfoot, because the people who really knew who Bigfoot was were terrified of him. So whenever the rumor came around that Bigfoot was in town, crime went down. And that's the kind of thing you run into in the Pure Poison background. It reminds me of the mood of the country southern beings that exist out there, who are only in the background. They're not really in the foreground much of the story, but it gave a neat feeling, because I think it's a challenge when we're writing fantasy. People usually they leave religion out altogether, which it can work really well, but sometimes you don't want to, or they have this good bad thing. And it's wonderful when you get something where you feel like the world is just bigger than we think it is, and the guys, why do we have to be the only people who could be on the side of good? So that was one thing I really enjoyed in that book.
I'm glad you like that. I have a very so to kind of put it on a spectrum, you get guys like Brandon Sanderson who have their magic in boxes. I mean, you can the red box, you open it, this kind of thing happens, and that's great and all.
It's
but
super
I don't.
hero-y.
Yeah, but I don't like to have. I mean, the boxes exist, but I don't really care to tell anybody what they are.
Yeah.
So I have this. I spend a couple of years building out this mythology that includes a large number of elements that I am never going to get to in any book. I don't have any intention to, but you may run into them during the story, and they're all worked out. I mean, there's nothing here that's just going to be a throwaway a line from.
It gives you a richness.
Yeah,
Gives you a
there's.
richness.
So I think it. I like it. I hope everybody else does too. I have trouble explaining my thought process, and in the process of thinking about Pure Poison, I was doing a lot of religious introspection, and frankly, all my novels are full of religious and spiritual introspection because besides writing in my spare time, I do a lot of spiritual and religious introspection. So oddly enough, it shows up in my writing. I try to not waste everybody's time with page after page, which I've written, of horrible introspective self-conversations. I edit those carefully out and drop them in the circular remainder bin. But
something similar though in The Broken Man and Bone God. There's a sense of something that kind of reminds you of Christianity, but it's when Christianity could possibly have come to Ireland. So it's your own made-up religion, but it's one where the emotional feel allows there to be a religion that kind of stands for good in among all these. Not only do you have pagans, but one thing I love because I actually have a similar thing in a story of mine. You have atheists who think astrology works. They think astrology.
Sorry, I'm giggling about that one.
Yeah, I mean,
that is my favorite science.
It right after I had written a short story. It had a very similar thing in it where they had discovered the science of how the stars influence things. I was like, cool, he and I are on the same page here. But
science ain't always right.
Right, exactly. Well, so you have 4 different groups, and one's very superstitious, and one's a bit like us, and one's got evil supernatural sorcery going on, and one of them are these atheists who think astrology is science. And it's interesting because it keeps, everybody has their own outlook on it. It's not one of these things where everybody kind of thinks the same. I want to freeze you for just a second and turn to our other author here and say that in Jagi the Dynamo also has a religious kind of a tone, but it's almost more, is it Shintoistic almost? I liked it, but it wasn't something I quite recognized.
It wasn't something you recognized. Well, that's an interesting question because basically the religion in Jagi the Dynamo actually started, as many things in the book actually started as a joke, because the characters by and large in the world of Jagi the Dynamo worship the Moon Princess,
right,
who is sort of the original magical girl, as it were. The joke there, of course, is that originally the Moon Princess was basically just Sailor Moon with the serial numbers filed off. I eventually expanded her role in the story beyond the original comedic, just they worship a Moon Princess. That was meant to be just when I was first developing this, that was originally just kind of a gag I threw in there, and then I started developing it further. The religion is, I would say, is very much based on kind of a very millenarian version of Christianity. They're awaiting the return of the Moon Princess, who's going to bring her new Tokyo down out of heaven, and that's pretty much the only thing that's likely to save humanity, since they're currently in a war of attrition against the rest of the universe. So, all that's left of the human race in this book is a small remnant that's getting slowly picked off by these repeated monster attacks.
In fact, let's step back just for a second, and we haven't actually described your setup. So just to let people know, there's one city, and this city is all that's left of humanity. So it has a Jewish quarter, or a Mexican quarter, or a Tokyo quarter, but it's all the little remnants kind of living together in this one big city. And they're constantly being attacked by these giant monsters, a lot like something out of, say, Power Rangers, where the giant monsters are being set down from the very funny evil woman up in space.
Originally, my idea originally, I I originally had an idea for a different story that I wasn't quite sure what to do with, and the setting was actually going to be Tokyo, and the joke was going to be that Tokyo is constantly under attack by monsters. I know that's a gag that's been done elsewhere by Mega Tokyo and whatever. So I decided to use that concept for Jake and the Dynamo, except I changed it to a fictional city, so it became Urbanopolis instead of Tokyo.
It kind of reminded me a bit of Tokyo, but it had these other, it was all put together. And then, so just for the background, so
I called it Urbanopolis, and I thought I was really clever to do that. And I remembered
it was cool.
I remembered after I did that Powerpuff Girls kind of did the same joke with their city of Townsville, but
but anyway, so in his city, you have these monsters attacking, and girls, is it under 18? I don't remember what the cutoff
they have to be. They lose their powers when they turn 18.
So girls between ages of like 10 and 18, I don't know how young they go.
The youngest magical girls currently operating in the city are the Bubble Princesses, who are 5.
There you go. So young girls, the age of Hawk's daughter, are all
we'll meet them later in the series. They're actually triplets, but there's 3 of them, and they're 5 years old. They're currently the youngest girls operating in the city.
That's hilarious. So these girls develop magic powers, and they like change, just like in an anime or something. But the boys don't. So of course the main character is a boy who's stuck among all these powerful girls. Trying to live through encountering zombies and stuff. And
Jake is kind of the straight man of the story. His the way I see it is that the population of Urbanopolis is made up of magical girls, crazy magical girl shippers, and Jake. he's this one person who's kind of doesn't
like
care
a normal
about
guy.
magical girls. Yeah, he's just a regular guy. Pretty much everyone else in the city is either a magical girl or seems to be obsessed with magical girls. This is kind of a joke that was based on some of my experience in fan communities, particularly when I was hanging out with bronies. And don't
exactly.
Say that. Exactly.
Oh my God!
I used to be something of a brony. Eventually, I kind of started to lose interest in the franchise a little bit.
He didn't watch them all that much, but he watched the whole season at one point. He said these are really good.
I was a brony for a few years.
They were pretty good.
Brony-friendly stream.
Yeah, brony friendly stream.
You'll have to actually put that on there. We'll get a million views.
I'm glad to hear you say that because I put a link to this on my old brony blog. So it's possible some bronies are tuning into this.
I just wanted to step back for a second and explain that the reason I'm here is that I have the honor of being the editor for all 3 of these books. And when I first got Jake the Dynamo, when I get a book in, I often know nothing about it or whether or not the person can write or anything. And I've, committed myself. And usually I've been really blessed in how great the story is. But in this one, I opened it and I'm starting to read, and it's kind of a description. I thought it was epic fantasy when I read the beginning. And it's like a page in, the evil person in their evil palace starts complaining about the gloomy lighting. I burst out laughing, and I think I was laughing for a lot of the book from then on. But she's going on about why do we Dark Lords have to have this gloomy lighting? I can't see anything. So it's really go ahead. You can go back to what you're saying about the religion. I just wanted to set up a little bit of the background so people know that it's humorous.
We were talking about the city's religion. I forgot. Well, basically they worship the Moon Princess, but. And really, admittedly, it's largely kind of, again, that it's the book is very heavily driven by humor. I did that not with any overt religious purpose, but because I thought a city full of magical girls that worships the Moon Princess was funny.
It's funny, yeah.
But beyond that, it's there is this elaborate scheme going on in the background. There is a giant battle between good and evil that's happening. Most of the people in the city have only slight inklings of it. Nobody except certain figures who are mostly off the page actually know entirely what's going on. And kind of the revelation of exactly what's going on over the course of the series is part of the developing mystery. So you get a few glimpses of that. In this book, there are a few scenes, especially one of the girls who's actually a robot.
Yeah,
a marionette. has had a personal experience with the Moon Princess, and we mostly meet the Moon Princess through Marionette's point of view. And of course, Jagi, you probably recognize during some of those scenes with the Moon Princess, I was borrowing heavily from H.P. Lovecraft, and
I mean, I thought the whole
made
earlier
a reference to the worm Ouroboros. And
one of the things I personally really love in stories is the glimpses at the things that happen in a previous time, like in Harry Potter, the Marauders, Harry's father and his friends, or how they and I just always love when there's like an established past and you're in the present, but then you see this glimpse of a previous generation. It just seems to me to bring a richness. And so that happens in here when we see Marionette and who's been around a long time, unlike most of the girls who only, last till they're 18. And then they go back to being normal people. And so
if they last that long at all.
Right, if they live. But
and again, magical girls do die in this world.
I mean, this is not a little kid story. I mean, I think teens might enjoy it, but it's kind of an adult level story, if you know what I mean.
I think we were discussing that. We kind of decided it probably qualifies as YA. We were discussing
YA. I think because YA actually hits a pretty. I mean, some people read YA at 12, but also YA is read at a higher level too. So it's about teens, but it's really something adults can enjoy. But anyway, I enjoyed those little glimpses we saw of how things started in the earlier magical girls and from an earlier time and things like that. I thought that was really cool. And I would say all three of these books, one thing all three of these books have in common is that I think of them as Christian friendly to the type of Christians who are not the Baptists you mentioned earlier who freak out at any type of magic. But anybody who wants a story that's not anti-Christian, which a lot of fantasy and science fiction is, but which explores ideas. And I'm hoping we're going to get a whole genre of this stuff going, because that's what I write in too. It's
not like
more explicitly Christian.
Well, I was about to say, have you wandered through hell lately, or just? Wait, was that your last book? Oh, wait, sorry.
Well, I'm actually thinking of the series I'm writing now. I'm on book 4, and there's a little bit in there.
Okay, so she hasn't gone.
It's not going to be, in both cases, it's not like I'm going, hey, I'm writing up, the dogma of a particular sect. It's not what I believe, because what I believe would be really boring in a story. It's not, so it's magical Christianity, fantasy Christianity. But I'm hoping, that one of the things I want to see Superversive do is develop a whole genre of these subversive inkling, subversive. And I like subversive inkling because then it's not Christian per se, but it's the kind of story that someone who likes C.S. Lewis and Tolkien might like. It's not offending you by being anti. It's not devout either. It's not preaching.
Well, and that. Just to bust in on that, the whole point of thinking about these things, of being semi-Christian, looking at it is when you're looking for answers, when you're trying to explore your philosophy and how you answer these questions. I mean, that's what science fiction and fantasy have always done. You're not really just exploring some alien world. You're also exploring inside yourself. These characters are feeling things and are reacting emotionally to spiritual and emotional moments, and you're trying to direct those in a way that they're real to the person.
Right.
That when a person converts to a religion, it's not Jediism, which has zero interaction with real world.
Yeah.
And there is no advanced level of Jediism where you actually move an object, because it's not real.
Yeah, we haven't said much about the Bone God background, so I want to take just a second to describe a little bit, because I think it's pertinent here. So we mentioned that in Hawke's book there are 4 groups in ancient Ireland, but we haven't said anything much about the specifics. It's hard to say the main character because there's several main characters, but the character of Waylaid, who is the one the story kind of revolves. There's 2 main characters. Yeah. The one revolves around, and the other is the heart of the story. So there's this giant and his assistant, his apprentice, the boy. And the boy is from the shortest. Each race in this world has a different height. kind of like One Piece. So the boy is from the shortest race, and the Waylaid is from the tallest race, who were the Fomor, and they were sorcerers. And Waylaid is a Fomor sorcerer who had a religious experience and basically saw God. In this background, there's a good father and a blessed mother, and they're kind of equal. It's slightly different religion, but it's very similar in feel. So he put aside his magic, and he put aside his evil ways, and his family turned on him, and he's a man who's broken. He limps, and his body is broken. And one thing that I really liked having this character, who he's not a very sympathetic guy. I mean, he himself doesn't have much sympathy for people. He's not a guy with much sympathy or empathy, I should say. He's not.
He's not nice. He didn't become nice. There was not a nice conversion.
But he's still trying to do what he thinks is the right thing, you know. I just think this story is a really nice one for people who are exploring these ideas, because it's like seeing the pagans interact with a higher moral ideal. But this guy is still a pretty cold monster, even though he's just, when people say, I have seen Christians say, oh, well, people say, why aren't I perfect because I'm a Christian? And I say back, you should see what I'd be like if I wasn't. That's what Waylaid is, you should see what he was like when he wasn't guy,
He is doing the right things for the right-ish reason, but he is he comes from a tradition and a family that, frankly, the more you hear about it, the less sympathetic you'll be.
Oh yeah.
So they're murderers, and he's a murderer.
Guys. I mean, he's a prince, so he's right. It's a spoiler for the first book, but not for the second. He comes from this royalty, and his people ran the world for a while from their point of view, and he could have had it all, and he kind of threw it aside in favor of the good, but it didn't make him have much empathy.
Well, he still is kind of a bloody ass. Pardon my French. He's not a nice guy. He wants to kill things, and when somebody's against him, the humor of a giant is rarely survivable by lesser people. And that's his.
He's clever. He tries to figure out how to solve the problems, and
his thing is to outthink his opponents and to come up with a way to make them fall on their own swords by whatever technique. And he does have a lot of, he'll come up with ways, and that's read the book on that one. He is a character that is really hard to have in your head, because he doesn't have a lot of sympathy for any of your problems either.
But you balance it out for the reader, because Piju, the young bold boy, is the reason I said he's the heart of the story. Is he's the one with heart. He's the empathetic guy. He's the small young boy who's growing into a man who understands people's problems and does have some heart for what's going on. And he's kind of, I think he's easiest for the reader to kind of bond with. There are other really good characters too, but
he's a character who loves and hates.
Right. He loves and he hates, and he cares for his people. And he lives in this town where all the members of his race except for him are slaves. And he's the only free member of his race, but he wants to, and all the males have been killed off. So it's all young children and women. And of course, this young man wants to save them all. He hasn't done it yet, but I'm hoping that maybe he'll have a chance of doing it at some point. And it's very sympathetic. You really feel for him. You really can understand what he wants and where his, take on things is. So you have a nice match between the giant who is so cold and his apprentice, this boy he's taken on, who is so lively and so energetic and so concerned with what's going on around him.
Right.
Let's talk real quick. Let's focus down a bit. What is in the Bone God that would interest a potential reader? What's the plot? What is this Bone God?
Okay, so
without spoiling it.
That's what I'm trying to do. Is so the core of it is these there was a plot. Essentially, they summoned an evil spirit for. Okay, so there's a technique that the sorcerer used called golems, and a golem is a sewn together body, and you put a spirit in it, and the spirit can then animate it, and then you have a golem which does your bidding, or well, what it wants to do if you don't have good control over it. Sorcerers use golems as to defend themselves, and a group of non-sorcerers decide to try to do this themselves, and it would go
indication that they maybe be manipulated, like they had a dream or a vision.
Yeah, so they're it all gets figured out later on why they even have any faint hope, and they bring back a creature who, as spirits get older, they get more complicated and they're less easy to control, which is why what Waylaid mostly does as he travels around the land is to find these more complicated spirits and get them to leave. Once they're no longer connected to the earth, to the people, to their golems, whatever, they leave. There's a whole universe out there for the dead that doesn't connect to us, and they shouldn't be here. And once they can see it, once they can be out there, they have no more interest in us than, why would you go on Twitter every day if you had the whole wide world out there? So, we're this tiny little piece, and they have the rest of the universe. But while they're trapped here, well, it seems important. And unfortunately, very complex spirits get powers, get abilities that are far beyond the control of sorcerers, even powerful sorcerers. And among the Fomor, they're called gods. And they worship these powerful spirits sometimes. Mm-hmm. But in the other religions call them demons because they tend to kill people and are very dangerous. And this thing they've summoned, they have no hope of controlling. And
it's made out of the bones initially of cattle, which is why you see the head there. It has the head of the original cow that was, bull, I believe it was, that was sacrificed. But then it also sucks the bones out of the people who don't have the ability to control it.
Cool.
Yeah. And sadly enough, just as the body count, I told the boys that were living in my house back in Huntsville that if they didn't shape up and get that house clean, then I was going to murder them all. I sold the house a couple of months ago, so just as you might want to guess, my dedication is to my boys. I'm sorry I had to kill y'all. And they die in horrible ways. They're dreading their receipt of the novel because I have told them that I'm going to kill them in the most horrible ways I can imagine. And they
do.
They believe it. The last time I murdered them all is we used to play role-playing games together, and you're talking bronies. And I started out this urban fantasy role-playing game using D20 Modern with the grim and gritty rules, and I have a zombie apocalypse planned, and they brought over a couple of their friends, one of them whose character was Pink Pony and the other was Princess Power. I can't remember exactly.
I like those characters.
But they all decided they had a brony-themed apocalypse team. Let me be clear. It was not the best team theme they could have thought of if they wanted to survive the apocalypse.
No, I like it. I like it.
After all, they were horsemen.
Yeah, they were.
They could call themselves the Four Horsemen. That would be good.
So
yeah, one was a dragon, and he actually lived pretty long. But
back to the bone god. So they call up this creature, and they can't control it. And word of it eventually comes to where Waylaid, who is basically going around putting spirits to rest, and his apprentice are living in this city that's run by the king of the guys who think they're atheists and believe in astrology. And there's also a fourth race who are taller and they're berserker warriors, but they have a kind of an honor to them. Anyway, so they end up, the plot is about them trying to confront this. God, that's not all that's going on. It's definitely a sequel to the previous book with some of the issues in the previous book continuing, but they're trying to figure out how to kill something that can't be killed, and
golems, I mean, aren't alive. I mean, there's no particular reason that chopping a leg off of a stuffed animal is going to cause the stuffed animal to die, and that's pretty much the problem that.
And there are a few terrifying scenes where they think they got the thing, and then it just sucks more people in. It's pretty vile, actually.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I kill people. It's.
We should put the links to the book videos up here somewhere.
Yeah,
because the book video has the thing coming at you through the ground.
That's terrifying. Oh my goodness, that was the best. Well, I hope everyone enjoys the Bone God, if not for any other reason than the monster, because it is the most horrific monster I have ever designed.
Pretty creepy.
He is the creepiest, horriblest monster, and I love him deeply. And there's the I can't wait for the third book, but there's still more work to be done.
I think we want to take a moment to go the plots of the other two. So Pure Poison. I don't think we've mentioned yet that Pure has been dead for 50 years when the story starts.
Yeah.
And she just escapes from the afterworld, thinking that it's 30 years earlier and she's going to meet her brother who went into the afterworld and, like Orpheus style and got her back. And somehow it takes 30 years till she gets out. So she walks out into the modern world and she's completely oblivious to modern things. One of the things that really amuses me in this story is she keeps looking around for the computers that everyone talks about. She knows what a computer is. It's just a giant box thing with lights on it. She hasn't seen one yet. She sees all these screens and these little objects people are holding in their hand, but she keeps wondering where the computers are. But one of the things that's brilliant about the story is that it's all done so subtly. Like, she doesn't understand why the windows don't open on the bus. Just one line, but of course it's because air conditioning was invented basically since she disappeared, and things like that are just throughout the whole story. So she's coming back from where she gets out in Death Valley, I think, and she goes all the way back to Knoxville. She's trying to find her brother and trying to find her family, and meanwhile there are vampires after her. So, she's the sweet girl who sees the world very differently. And part of the charm of the story is just how simple and charming the 1950s girl is in her crazy modern situation.
She tries to be a nice person, and she is, and she has a morality to her that's a little out of place in the modern world. She worries about showing her ankles. I mean, she's not normal. She's not modern. She's
a very normal, even a bit casual 1950s girl.
Right. I mean,
and one of the things I liked about it was that there's so many modern things that have become kind of disgusting in how unvirtuous they are. I don't know how else to put it. And she has this old-fashioned values without seeming judgmental, It's not. She doesn't seem holier than thou. She just seems decent, And I found it enjoyable to read about her because of that.
Well, I hope everybody likes her. She has her moments of everything. I mean, she's a very person. I mean, I made her as much a real person as she can be, and so while she is, I mean, as you say, very sweet, she's still. Gets her anger up, and she has her moments.
When I say she's sweet, I mean that she has a likable quality. But she's a definite person. She gets angry, and she has, she feels like you're talking to a person from her, and fits her background and the place and the time she's from, and she's. It's not like she's super sweet or anything like that.
So she's just wandering around the modern hellscape and interacting with the
well, she goes.
She gets a job. She can't find her brother right away, so she gets a job at a diner, I think it is. And so it's partially just her trying to find her way around the modern world and make some money and figure out how the clothes work, And it's partially her dealing with the supernatural effect that has, and on top of all this, occasionally she goes into, like, I don't know if it's a trance, a dream, an alternate reality, where she seems to be back in the afterworld where she used to put on plays. She was part of afterworld spirits that entertained others. And she sees everything like it's just a theater. And it's really interesting. It's kind of cool. You can't tell if she's hallucinating or if she's really in an altered state of mind. But I thought that part was really interesting.
She's dead, and so she has some weirdnesses that affect her. And one of them is that she doesn't see. She's capable of seeing reality in a completely different way. I'm not going to get into it. It has to do with, well, how far are you on the Immaculate Corpse? Anyway,
I haven't got. This was what I'm going to do this week. So let's not say
that'll
anything
tell
about
you.
it yet. But I'm editing the sequel right now, which hopefully we'll have out in the fall.
It might explain more, but no, she doesn't understand. And you're right. Sometimes she sees herself back in the theater. And she's sitting in.
I thought it was cool. I'm used to role-playing games where we had alternate levels of reality that you could use for sense impressions to find out things other people didn't know, and it was a lot like that. But you couldn't. As a reader, you can't quite tell what's real and what's not real. But it's in a good way rather than a badly written way, if you know what I mean.
Well, what I don't want, and that's the and I really feel cheated by the novels that. The character's essentially hallucinating 90% of the novel, and they're still, for example, still in the sanatorium. And at the end of the day, at the end of the novel, nothing has actually happened. The person is just laid in their room dreaming. Okay, that's not happening here. Real things are happening all the time. She just doesn't understand them.
Yeah.
And the theater is a specific thing that she can do that she doesn't understand and is slightly explained in the first novel and more explained in the second one. But it doesn't need explanation. It just is what it is. And
on the subject of slightly explaining the first one, and then I want to get over to Jake, but on the subject of slightly explaining the first one, I want to say about the Bone God that in the first book, the Broken Man, the story seems to kind of be, it almost stands on its own. Even though it's part of a series. But in the second one, you realize you're actually in the middle of an epic, that there's these prophecies and these vast things going on that the characters that are the main characters are involved in, and you begin to recognize where they fit in them. That is actually quite, dramatic and of an epic level. And I thought it was neat that I hadn't realized it went from being kind of dark fantasy, Irish, a little bit of horror, to being epic fantasy with horror, and so that was really neat too. So if you like the first one, there's all sorts of reveals in the Bone God that make more of the main characters.
One of the things I've been trying to do, and I thank you for seeing it that way, is I try to write stories so that all the thousands of plot lines are pared down so that we can actually see a beginning and an end in one story.
Yeah, and they come on gradually.
Now, you don't. Yeah, I don't have to solve every mystery. So some things are just mentioned in the first book, and they're not even solved in the second book.
Yeah,
but you're going to get.
Grow. You get
the world. It grows. The world grows. You don't end up stuck in art forever, and the prophecies connect you to the historic aspects of this, the future and the past, and it's like the real world. I mean,
it's really neat. Anyway,
trying to keep it. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it just occurs to me we haven't gone over the plot for Jake the Dynamo too. So.
Oh, excellent. Yes.
Do you want to say something? How did you pronounce it? D.G.D?
D.G.D, yes. The plot is basically that you have Jake, who's a teenage boy who thinks he has his future worked out and knows exactly what he's going to do with his life. He's really looking forward to going to high school. He's planning to, he's got plans from there to enter university and study to be an engineer. He really has everything worked out, and the entire universe decides to derail him. He's got pretty much about 3/4 of the universe would like him dead. And his only chance to survive is this girl who is what would you call it? Well, she's a tsundere is what she is, but she's basically picks on him. She's a little brat,
Yeah, she's an 11-year-old tough girl brat.
She's also based on a real person, but who will leave, like with pure poison, will leave the identities unknown.
Yeah, secret.
But what's that?
I leave him a secret. I said, but she, she's not at all pleased with the fact that he's around. And at first, it's kind of they're thrown together by chance, and yet the relationship begins to grow as they kind of get to know each other better and work together, and
Jake is torn back and forth, first of all, by desire to live his neatly planned life as far away from magical girls as possible, on the one hand, and then his desire to, he's kind of driven by a sort of big brother instinct to try to protect Pretty Dynamo, even though he's not very well equipped.
Pretty Dynamo is the girl's name. We just says Dynamo on the cover, but Pretty Dynamo.
The Dynamo is what's on the cover. Her full name is Magical Girl Pretty Dynamo, but her real name as a regular grade school girl is Dana Volt, is her actual name. Dana Maxwell Volt being her full name. The reason there, of course, everything about her is electricity themed, which is why the name. But the plot is driven by Jake's conflicting intentions and conflicting desires, and basically the entire universe is out to get him, and the entire universe is out to get the human race, and these two have everything thrown at them repeatedly and are pretty much constantly fighting through the course of the book, both squabbling with each other and also fighting off various monsters. My personal favorite monster in the book is probably Chi Square, the tea-drinking statistical troll.
Oh my God, I'm terrified.
I mentioned that this is funny. And
Chi Square enjoys drinking tea, and he also does statistics and uses his statistical powers to predict the moves of his opponents. And of course, he has a big fight with one particular magical girl where basically they're throwing statistics-based jokes back and forth at each other. Well,
okay, I'm really frightened. Really frightened.
It's meant to be more funny than frightening, but
yeah.
Is. I think
I took too much statistics in college. I'm terrified.
I see.
I'm pretty sure it's always been out to get me.
I'm sure you know a lot more about statistics than you actually do. I looked up a few things in order to write a few jokes, but
so the whole book is very inventive. The magical girls all have amusing names and funny powers and themes and funny ways of talking, and some of the villains are just monsters they fight. But I think I mentioned that many things made me laugh, but the conversation between Jake and Dynamo and it was a zombie at the end when they were talking about brains.
The demoniac, where they
yeah. Oh my gosh, was that funny?
The final boss in the book is a demon possessed guy who's trying to.
That's it. Yeah. And they just get it. And the whole attitude, they have this kind of slightly irreverent attitude about everything. It's a bit gritty, it's grittier than, the average magical girl anime.
Of course, since everything is meant to be comedic, at least on some level, of course, that demoniac is in part a parody of The Exorcist.
Yeah,
Which is why the repeated lines where he's always, claiming that your mother is in hell, and then when Sukuban Tsubasa shows up, and they start exchanging your mama jokes, in the course of the fight. So
it's all so the actual plot involves this young man trying to survive in this crazy world with the monsters and figuring out what's going on, and there's, as he mentioned, there's a kind of an overplot involving the powers of light and darkness and what they're trying to do and what the Moon Princess is trying to do. The Moon Princess,
who has some kind of elaborate plot she's working in the background.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think you mentioned the Bone God veering eventually toward epic fantasy. I would say Jake and Dynamo is veering eventually toward something more like a sort of post-human transcendentalist kind of science fiction is where this is eventually headed. You've got a humanity that is in some way going to have to succeed past what its current state is if it's going to survive at all.
I would say that this is a bit in the same genre, though much, much, much funnier, as Neon Genesis Evangelion. And there's monsters arriving, there's strange things, the fate of humankind is in there's attempts to try to actually change things at a large level.
It's still on.
Evangelion, I'd say, is one of the inspirations. Actually, one of the big inspirations, Jagi, was actually your own husband's Awake in the Nightland.
There we go. I was waiting for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a number of stories like that seem to have come out recently. I mean, we have, of course, Attack on Titan's been very popular lately.
Yeah.
Ruby, which definitely draws on Attack on Titan, is there. And then also, I was very much, I was thinking about the city and how to build it. Awake in the Nightland is definitely something that was at least in the back of my mind. Although obviously that's horror and this is comedy, but it's a similar concept where you have all that's left of humanity in one place. Everything, powers completely beyond their imagination, are entirely surrounding them and are out to get them.
Yeah.
And nobody knows why.
Yeah, and they're trying to figure out why. And
evil forces out here are just completely implacable and beyond human understanding. So humanity does not know why their city is constantly under attack by these monsters. And most people don't even know where all these magical girls are coming from either.
I hate to interrupt for even a second. I have got to go. I've reached my 1 hour limit. I've got to run.
Excellent, Hawk. Good to talk to you, and I hope people will enjoy your books.
It was good to meet you, and I think I'm going to have to grab those books. They sound really interesting. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll talk to y'all later.
Take care.
See you soon.
Well, I guess D.G. can kind of sum up or say a final bit or whatever you would like, unless Ben has something else.
No, I'm under no real time limit. I had some questions for Hawk that I was going to ask. But,
sorry. Well, we'll get him on again. We'll get him on again.
Yeah, no. Next time he has a book coming out, I'll definitely corner him and ask him some pertinent questions. Because I did read, I'm going to take a few seconds with this, then we'll return to the Dynamo. I did read The Broken Man, which I thought it was very good. It was definitely worth a read. It was definitely of its own thing. It was definitely highly made. But there were a few things like internal logic that I wanted to ask him, because I'm not as big on the Irish fairy tales as I am English, French, and other types of fairy tales. So I was wondering if it was stuff specific to it, especially concerning their berserkers and other things. But it was.
I'm sure he would
very
enjoy that. Sorry, I should have given you. We're trying to work on talking about the plot and stuff, but.
It's fun.
He will the Immaculate Corpse, which is the follow-up to Pure Poison, if all goes well, will be out in a month or two also.
Oh wow.
So maybe we can get him back at that time and ask him some more questions about all the books.
Oh yeah, I like it. So we've talked about plot.
Yeah.
I thought Ruby came out before Attack on Titan.
I want to say that the Attack on Titan manga had been in existence for some time before that, but I'm not absolutely certain about that.
It's hard to track these things from here unless
I would have to go look at the exact dates of when those things started. So you might be right. I might be mistaken about that.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it. But it's because I'm a big fan of like pre-Monty Ohm's death, Ruby. Have you watched the show?
I watched all of it when Ohm was still with us. I think I watched the season after they continue it after his untimely death. I watched most of it. I need to pick it up again. I was enjoying it. I don't really remember why I stopped. I think I got distracted by something else.
Well, don't worry about it past the end of season 3.
Right?
Yeah, it's not that it goes bad, but like Monty Ohm, eventually I am going to write articles for the Necronomicon Aesthetica about authorship versus craftsmanship, and it's like you need the craftsmanship, but at some point in time you need that spirit, the muse that is specific to an individual, that can enhance a series. Like Ruby, the fight scenes are so fine, but then he dies.
There's no question that that man had an incredible talent for
absolutely
for creating animated fight scenes, and everybody recognized that. I mean, he was amazing at that, and that was a big part of the driver for the series. I mean, even in the first couple of seasons where the animation was comparatively primitive compared to what they were able to do later. Just the energy in the fight scenes, he always knew exactly where the camera should be, where the characters would swing and sweep around. Yeah, it was incredible, and it was obvious, after he was gone, that there was nobody on the project who could fill that role in the same way. Even though, I mean, I definitely was respecting what they were trying to do, and also the improvements in the art design and the animation in the third season were unquestionable. They were light years ahead of the previous seasons. But yeah, the choreography was, and I guess, I don't know if it's called cinematography and animation, but cinematography or whatever they call it, and the choreography were certainly not there anymore. And I don't think that came as a big shock.
No.
But because I think everybody knew that he was the driver behind that.
Yeah.
But,
and besides that, he seemed to be the only one unimpressed by some of the convergence issues that is affecting, but not completely destroying yet.
Okay. I haven't seen it much past third season, so I don't exactly know how the story has continued from that point. I'm a bit behind the.
I just wanted to bring this up because now we're going to talk about Jake and the Dynamo's fight scenes. So we have pun battles, which I'm fond of. We have battles of wits, it sounds like. But is there any scenes where it's like Pacific Rim just two characters hauling off on each other in a no hold barred?
We have scenes like that. Oftentimes the pun battles will be going during the scenes where the characters are hauling off with their kung fu fights.
There's a lot of fighting. I mean, this is the kind of story that would make a good comic. There's a lot of
the way that I tried to write the story is that every other chapter would be basically an action scene. So you have a scene where the characters are moving, they're trying to get to a place, there's some character development, and then they run into something, and then the next chapter they're fighting. The jokes are often interwoven with the fight scene. So, I mean, you have characters doing a pun battle, but they're also swinging weapons at each other at the same time. So typically the dialogue is often in the form of like one-off quips, like from a cheesy action movie, which is, of course, deliberate.
It's like old-fashioned Batman, where they were fighting and bantering at the same time.
Yeah, so you have scenes like, I mean, there's a one-off fight between Pretty Dynamo and a magical girl named Sword Seamstress, who fights with a pair of knitting rapiers. She has a pair of swords that she can knit with, and they have a battle that's a lot of sewing puns while they're also fighting at the same time. Dynamo is able to fence with that spear that you see her with on the cover. And you have one of the first big battle. Well, there's a battle in the first chapter to get things started off. But the first kind of big battle is in Chapter 3, which is Pretty Dynamo on her flying snowboard against a giant monster that's sort of Godzilla-like. So she's fighting that, and then there's scenes where they're trying to escape a zombie apocalypse. There's several fights with robot dinosaurs from space, including one where Jake is desperately trying to reactivate a robot magical girl while another group of magical girls is trying to fend off robot velociraptors, and so forth and so on. It's a very action-driven story. It's largely a mix of action and comedy with some of the bigger things going on in the background occasionally teased to you throughout.
And it's an interesting story because the main character is not the fighter. Not that he doesn't occasionally do things, but he's like a normal kid up against a dinosaur, surrounded by superheroes. So he has to, find clever ways that things he can do to help, or sometimes he just has to hide while the girls fight, But
one of the things I did, and with Jagi's help with this, I mean, I made myself a goal when I first wrote this, is absolutely every action scene that happens, Jake will have something to do. I didn't want him to just stand there with his mouth hanging open while the magical girls fought. So there's always something going on. He's trying to reactivate a deactivated magical girl. He's trying to fend off, a demon-possessed magic user to give Pretty Dynamo some time. He's trying to find a way to outwit this monster that has statistical powers. All these kinds of things.
Yeah, Jake to just get away from the zombie horde. He just has to. I mean, that's just an action.
He's dragging Pretty Dynamo away from zombies. There's always something Jake is having to do to save other people's lives, or save his own, or defeat the monsters. And Jagi and her quite insightful editing helped me to ensure that was staying true throughout.
That I really tried to look for was to look for the spots where you could add more Jake.
And I think the final version, I'm reasonably satisfied that Jake's. Again, like I said from the beginning, I had set myself a rule that Jake was always going to have to be a very active character throughout the story. And part of the reason I even wanted to write this book was the very challenge that's involved in making what is basically a superhero story. I think of them as magical girls, right? In the Japanese anime tradition, rather than as superheroes, strictly speaking. But it's very much a story about magical girls, but the main character is the sidekick, who doesn't have any powers, but is dragged along for the ride. He's both an action survivor, but also is tough enough that he gets some things done over the course of the story.
He's also a little bit more mature than some of them. I mean, he's just a kid, but some of them are younger, so he sometimes has a little bit of more of an insight than, it depends. Some of them are older too, but.
And as it's also kind of another rule built into the story, the magical girls, by and large, have very goofy personalities.
Yes. Some of them are great. There's like a cowgirl and a voodoo girl. I mean, they're really amusing.
I do love the variety.
And part of what I wanted to do with this too is I've noticed I've been a magical girl fan for some years. I've noticed a lot of these magical girl franchises. It's often done where the magical girls work entirely in secret. That wasn't the case with Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon was somehow a celebrity, even though it seemed like most people should not have had any way of knowing what she did. But you get a lot of other franchises, I think Pretty Cure particularly, where you have these characters, they're fighting monsters, but they're always doing it somewhere else. And the general population of people is completely oblivious to this. I've always been a little bit dissatisfied with it, because these girls put on these incredibly elaborate costumes, and then nobody can see them. I wanted to do a magical girl story where magical girls' existence and their monster fights are common knowledge, kind of similar to what you have in like American superhero comics that exist in these shared
Marvel
universes.
Comics, where they all exist.
Yeah, like in the Marvel comics, where superhero battles are a normal part of the New York landscape.
Right.
It's similar to that. Everybody knows magical girls are out there, and kind of the entire city of people too. Also, as part of the humor, it's like the entire city is like a magical girl fandom, except for Jake. He's the one person who's not interested.
Things happen to Jake, like he gets caught by a camera and his parents discover he's out and getting danger, and you don't see that in a lot of these things, but he has this normal life going on, and one of the things that he only touched on lightly, but there was an indication that families were terrified about the idea of their daughters becoming magical girls and possibly getting killed,
They certainly can be, because
girls had to kind of hide from their family who wouldn't want them to go do this too.
Right. Most of the girls maintain secret identities, and part of that is just because that's one of the tropes of the genre. But in universe, that's explained. I mean, partly, that they want to hide this from their families. They also want to hide from the monsters who could potentially target them in their non-magical forms.
There's a lot of reasons why they want to keep secret, because they're vulnerable when they're in their little girl form, and they don't want the bad guys coming after them that way. But but Jake doesn't have a costume, so when the camera catches him doing something, he's just screwed.
Yeah, well, and he's ending up on TV, and basically the only reason that the villains don't know who he is because both the news reporters and the villains are incompetent, and that's kind of driven again as a joke. They give him a a nickname that is constantly used as a humorous insult, basically throughout the book. But
what is that nickname?
There will be later in the story. The time will come where they'll eventually figure out who he is, and that will have consequences. I just didn't want to do that in this first book.
Yeah,
because the
yeah.
first book was
But his parents know it's him, and they're
His
terrified.
His parents know. His friends know.
We need to talk about something. And he's like, please don't be talking about sex or weed. Please not sex or weed, son. We know you're going out at night and being a superhero. Dad, it's not what you think. I don't have a choice in this. Son, look, you can tell us.
There is actually a scene like that in the book.
There is.
Perfect.
There is actually a scene where they sit Jake down and they're like, Jake, we want you to know that even though we may not approve of your lifestyle choice, what's most important to us is that you're happy. And and this is of course that's carried on as a gag until finally his mother leans down and says, Jake, be honest with your mother. Are you a sidekick?
But the funny thing is that he doesn't feel like a sidekick. I mean, I know the story is, here's the sidekick boy to the magical girls, but you don't feel when you're reading the story like, this is not an important character, but rather like he's an intrepid and interesting guy who's dealing with these problems, So
yeah, I think again that was part of my goal. I wanted to make the sidekick the main character.
Yeah, and
partly probably because that was just I think it was easier for me to write from Jake's point of view than it might have been from some of the others. But my own experience, like with superhero stories, I mean, I sometimes feel out of the loop when I talk to you guys. You guys are all into the DC and the Marvel comics. I've always really gravitated more toward. Oh well, okay. I've got Ben here who's on my side.
Yeah.
I've always gravitated more toward indie titles when I read American comics or toward manga. But I've always really liked, and one of the reasons, in fact, I find magical girls appealing is because many of them kind of do fit this characteristic. I really like reluctant heroes.
Yeah.
I like the heroes who maybe they don't have powers, they maybe don't want to be here, but they're going to try to do the right thing anyway. And that's the kind of character I wanted to set up with Jake. He really, really does not want to have anything to do with this.
Yeah, but
definitely anyway, and he's also motivated by kind of an interior. Here's this girl, and she's getting attacked by monsters, and kind of as a guy, he feels like it's sort of his duty to run in there, even though in terms of sheer ability, she's actually much better equipped to deal with this than he is, since she has superpowers. Of course, there are times in the story when she doesn't have superpowers; her power drains out, or she'll have other issues that come up, and when she's not in her magical form, she is just an 11-year-old girl.
Yeah,
and I tried to really kind of emphasize the strength difference between these characters. When she's in her magical form, she can pick Jake up and throw him. When she's not in her magical form, there's a scene where she's punching him, and her fists are just basically bouncing off of him, and he's barely feeling it because he's an athletic 14-year-old kid. She's a little girl who's actually kind of small for her age to boot, and so there is this real difference, and that comes up a number of times in the stories, where just the extreme difference in their physical abilities depending on what form she's in.
Yeah. On the sidekick subject, somebody once described the movie. And have you seen the movie Big Trouble in Little China?
Oh yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen it.
That was described as the premise kind of was comedy sidekick as main character.
That's what I understood as
because
being kind of
in almost any other story, the martial arts doing Fran would have been the main character, and the comedy guy would have been the sidekick. But that movie is one of my favorite. It works really well, and this also, I think, just it also has humor, in it. So this also, I think, it really works. And there are times when it's hard for Jake to know what to do, but his presence does seem to be improving. Not all the time, obviously. Sometimes things get messed up, but you don't feel like he's just shouldn't be there. It's more of a case of him kind of
I think there's definitely scenes in the story where I think you can say if it were not for Jake, Pretty Dynamo would not have survived this.
Yeah. Right. And
that
some of the other girls too. I mean, I seem to be important to what was going on, even if it's, trying to restart Marionette or whatever it is that he's doing,
or helping out Andalusia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Jake becomes kind of inadvertently becomes a vital part of this makeshift defense force that is humanity's last stand against the entire universe.
Yep. Yep. Anyway, I think that's, a bit of an introduction for all three of the new books that are coming, which, all three of which I'm really excited about. I've been really excited about Jake and Dynamo, and I just will mention, we meant to have it out quite a bit earlier, but our wonderful cover artist had a emergency at work. His boss collapsed, and he had to take over for a while. So the cover got put off a bit, so it's coming out a bit late, but I'm really excited about it.
It's coming off late, but I have to say, looking at that cover, that I think it was worth the wait.
Yeah, I think so too.
I really love his design for Pretty Dynamo. I think that is. When I first saw that, I said, "Wow, that is really cool." And the little insignia I'm using for myself, and I'm talking here, that is also from him. That's his interpretation of Pretty Dynamo's insignia, and I love it.
And you don't see it here, but on the back cover is Pretty Dynamo's little sidekick.
That's right.
Whatever you call them.
Mentioned the familiars.
Yeah, they all have familiars, and
most of the magical girls have most of the magical girls have some kind of animal companion. Some of them are aliens. In this case, that's Tesla, the little Tesla, the lightning bug.
So she's a lightning bug, and he's on the back cover, and I thought
he's an Electronian from Electron. But some of the magical girls familiars are fairies or creatures from alternate dimensions or spirit animals or whatever.
Which brings
magical girls can get their powers from all kinds of different places. So,
something that I had meant to mention, which is there are hints that there's some kind of reason why these girls get powers. I mean, this didn't used to happen in the human race. So, I'm kind of hoping that we'll find out more as the next book comes along about...
I'm about 2/3 of the way through the draft of the second volume, which is under the working title of Dead to Rights, spelled R-I-T-E-S. And there is actually a discussion in there. I don't know if it'll make it in the final draft or not. I haven't decided. There is actually a discussion in there where a couple of characters are discussing how it is exactly that these girls are getting powers. But yes, all of this fits into that big story that's going on in the background with the Moon Princess and her plans and the fight against Lord Shadow and all of that. So
yep. Anyway, it's quite delightful. It's really fun. It's one of these books you can sit back and it's a bit grim in a way. I wouldn't give it to a young kid, but the humor makes it really enjoyable to go forward with. So.
I've been told by a few different people now who've read it that it made them laugh until they cried, and so
that happened to me too.
I can that I consider probably about the greatest compliment I could get. If that happens, if you laugh until you cry, then I consider that mission accomplished. I hope that will continue to be the case with people who read this. So.
It was funny in general, and there were a lot of things that made me smile, but there were a couple things that really made me laugh out loud, and there were one or two places where I couldn't stop laughing altogether. So, yeah. Anyway, I hope that readers will go out and get it. It's coming out again, as I mentioned, at the beginning of September, and we'll put up a note when it comes out, and also Hawks Books, which, if they're not out already, are about to come out.
And I have a link in the description.
And again, I hope I'll have the sequel to Jake and the Dynamo ready to go pretty soon. They're going to be fighting vampire pastry chefs. So
classic.
Oh, that's great.
Now, anyway, I do have to ask, you do talk about the humor there. Is it like Magical Girl D.G.D, and like one of them's clutching their stomach, and it's like, oh, I'm not full of glitter after all.
No, they bleed blood when that happens. There are scenes of magical girls getting wounded or worse. The violence in the book is, for lack of a better word, is real. It's not glitter violence. It's actually trying to kill you violence. Some of the girls use glitter as part of their weaponry, but nonetheless, the weapons that they're using are genuinely dangerous weapons. As you can see on the cover there, Dynamo is electrical themed. She uses electrical weapons. She has an electrified spear and an electrical crossbow. She also shoots ball lightning out of her hands.
Ooh. And one thing we haven't mentioned is that the magical girls compete for like ranking.
They have
one giant tournament arc.
No, they compete by like how much attention they get from the news and stuff like that. How bad they are against the villains. And Dynamo's like the top one at the beginning, right?
Dynamo has a competency rating of 9.0. Yeah. They have what's called a competency rating. There's a threat assessment board that rates the monsters, and basically a magical girl, for whatever monster she kills, she gets a competency rating equal to the threat level of the monster. And so Dynamo at present, because her weapons are particularly good against a large kaiju, she's currently rated at 9.0. There's another magical girl who shows up, Sukaban Tsubasa, the bad girl of magical girls, who is looking to unseat Dynamo from her
trying to take her place at the top.
So there's a rivalry mounting between Dynamo and Sukaban Tsubasa, and there's also an ongoing rivalry for reasons that will be explained later between Pretty Dynamo and the aforementioned sword seamstress. So
yeah, and there's also little hints of things that happen before Jake comes along. I mean, some books don't do a good job of giving you a sense of everything ever happened before today.
Dynamo has an ongoing rivalry with sword seamstress. The reasons behind it will be eventually explained. I don't want to talk about it now, partly because I'd ruin a joke that's going to be made later. But
I love
it. There's a reason behind their fight that I at least think is very funny. But we'll see if other people think so.
After all this build-up, if it's just she took the last pudding cup, I'm not going to be happy with you.
It's not the pudding cup.
Okay, good. All right. I trust you. I trust you.
Although that would actually work, considering what some of these girls are like. that would work to explain probably a few conflicts, but not this particular one.
There's like a roaring kaiju in the back. I swear, Andalusia, you gotta have to let it go. It was my pudding cup. It had my name on it. Andalusia, there's Godzilla over the horizon. Well.
They're more likely to fight over juice boxes, actually. But
is this a metaphor for drugs?
No, that's juice boxes are what they use to power up. That's the girl's energy source. Again,
so it's
PCP.
A lot of this. I get it.
A lot of this is humor driven. So again, that was done partly because it's silly, but yeah, the magical girls definitely love their juice boxes.
Right. I'm sure the grim dark fan fictions are already formulating in the minds of the unconscious dreamers who are on the same wave. Well, thank you for being on. It was a pleasure to have both you, Jagi, and Hawking on my live stream. Hope to have you on again once your sequel comes out, so we can discuss whether your long shot jokes pass muster, because that is what is important to me. That and giant monster fights. Long cons, dry humor, and giant monster fights. Those are the three things.
Well,
anyway,
I have both humor and giant monster fights. So
okay. Whew. All right. Well,